People don't usually ask me which metrics to track. They ask how often to check them. That's actually the better question, because the exact same number can mean two completely different things depending on the window you look at it through. A churn number that looks like a 5-alarm fire on Monday can look completely normal again by Friday, and nothing about the business actually changed in between. The sample was just too small on Monday to mean anything at all, and by Friday enough data had come in to wash the noise back out. I run a handful of small businesses off these exact numbers day to day, and over time I've settled into a mixed rhythm. Some things get a quick look every week, some things I only open once a month, and a couple of things I've made myself stop checking more than once a quarter on purpose because checking them more often was actively making me worse at running the business, not better informed. None of this is a schedule you should copy exactly, since your customer count and your kind of business will pull the lines in different places. It's an example of how to think about the problem, not a template to paste onto your own dashboard. Here's the idea underneath all of it. A metric isn't really one number, it's a measurement plus a time window, and the two can't be pulled apart no matter how the dashboard presents them. Conversion rate isn't a fixed fact about your business, it's a different number depending on whether you're looking at today's visitors, this week's, or this month's. Shrink the window and you get more noise, a slow Tuesday, a checkout button that broke for 3 hours, one customer who accidentally signed up twice. Stretch the window out and you get less noise and more truth, but you also find out about problems more slowly, and that lag has a real cost too. So the real question was never weekly versus monthly. It's how much noise you're willing to sit with in exchange for how much speed you get in return. Different metrics land in very different places on that trade-off, which is exactly why using one cadence for everything usually serves you badly. A dashboard that pushes you to check every number every day is optimizing for a feeling of control, not for accuracy, and those two things are not the same thing at all. Some numbers move fast enough and matter urgently enough that waiting a month to look at them would be a mistake. Traffic and conversion on anything you just changed is the clearest case. If you changed a landing page, a price, or an ad this week, you want to know within days whether it broke something, not a month from now after you've already spent the ad budget on it and can't get that spend back. And to be clear, that isn't the same as drawing a conclusion from a week of data. It's about catching failures early, which is a much narrower job. If your conversion rate drops to basically zero on a weekly check, that almost always means something broke on the technical side. A form that stopped submitting, a payment provider having a bad day, a plugin update that quietly broke your checkout. It does not mean customers suddenly change their minds about what you sell, and treating it that way would send you chasing the wrong fix entirely. Cash position and outstanding invoices belong in the weekly pile too, and this one has nothing to do with statistics at all. If you're a one-person business, you are also your own accounts receivable department, whether you like that or not, and nobody else is going to chase the late payment for you. Looking at what's overdue once a week isn't analysis, it's just basic hygiene, the same as checking your email or locking the door on your way out. Support and complaint volume is the third one. A sudden jump in messages asking how to cancel, or a wave of refund requests, is an early warning sign worth taking seriously right away. It tells you something in the product or the billing broke well before that damage would ever show up in a churn number you only calculate once a month. By the time it reaches the monthly number, you've already lost weeks you could have used to fix whatever caused it. Notice the thread running through all three of those. Weekly review is for operational health. It's a fire check, not a trend check. You're not trying to learn something new about the direction of the business on a weekly cadence. You're trying to catch something that's actively broken before it has time to get worse and compound. This next part is where I see people get it wrong the most, usually because they're importing habits from ad platforms, where checking numbers daily makes sense because the volume moving through them is huge. In a small business, the volume usually isn't huge, and that one difference changes everything about how often a given number is safe to look at. Churn rate is the big one. If you have a small customer base, and almost every one-person business does, churn measured over a single week can swing wildly based on nothing more than which day of the month a handful of renewals happen to land on. Losing 2 customers out of 40 in 1 week reads like a crisis on the screen. It might just be 2 people whose subscriptions happen to renew that week, one of whom left for a reason that has nothing to do with you at all, like a card that expired. Churn needs enough customers and enough time in the count to say anything honest, and for a small list, that usually means monthly at the very fastest, and sometimes quarterly is more honest still. MRR growth is next. Monthly recurring revenue is, by its own name, a monthly flavored number, and watching it week to week mostly shows you the lumpiness of when invoices happen to process, not whether the business is actually growing underneath that. I check MRR once a month, on the same day every month, specifically so I'm comparing like against like instead of a light week against a heavy one and reading a difference into pure timing. Customer lifetime value is slower still. It's built from how long customers typically stick around and what they typically spend along the way. And both of those inputs only settle down into something reliable over months of history. Recalculating it every week doesn't make it more accurate. It just makes the number jump around while the actual business underneath it hasn't moved at all. I treat lifetime value as a quarterly number at most, and I stay honest with myself that even then, it's an estimate built on assumptions, not a fact carved in stone. And then there's anything coming out of a cohort test or a split test that hasn't reached the sample size or the time window you planned for it upfront. Checking a test every day and calling it the moment it looks good is one of the most common ways a small operator fools themselves without realizing it. A test that looks like a clear winner after 3 days can flip completely by day 14, once enough of the slower customers show up in the numbers. If you set a test to run for a month, resist the urge to end it early just because the first week looks exciting. The numbers halfway through are simply not the same as the finished numbers, and acting on them early throws away the point of running the test. A monthly review shouldn't just be the same dashboard, opened less often out of habit. It needs to be a different kind of look entirely, with a different question behind it. Where the weekly check is about catching problems, the monthly one is about asking whether the overall direction is actually right. For me, that starts with putting MRR next to its trend over the last several months, side by side, rather than looking at this month sitting on its own with nothing around it for comparison. It also means calculating churn over the full month and lining that figure up against the previous couple of months, so one unusual month doesn't get overread as the start of a pattern that isn't really there. It means looking at which acquisition channel actually produced customers who stuck around, not just which one produced the most signups on paper. A channel that gets you volume and a channel that gets you retention are not the same thing, and mixing them up is one of the easier mistakes a small operator can make when the vanity number is sitting right there in front of you. And it means a plain read of support themes, looking for a pattern that a single week would never show you, like one feature that keeps confusing new customers month after month, regardless of what you write in the help docs. The monthly review is also the point where I let myself actually act on a metric rather than just note it and move on. Weekly numbers are for urgent fixes. Monthly numbers are for real decisions, whether to change a price, retire a feature, or move where the marketing effort goes next quarter. I try hard not to let those two kinds of decisions swap places with each other, because a monthly decision made on a weekly number is usually a decision made too early. There's a failure mode I've fallen into myself more than once, opening the dashboard every single day simply because it's easy to do, and then treating whatever shows up as if it were meaningful just because I looked at it. When you check a noisy number daily, you will eventually catch it on a scary swing purely by chance, and it is very tempting to go do something about it right away. Most of the time, the right response to a scary weekly churn number is to wait and see if it holds up over the full month, not to panic and rewrite your pricing that same afternoon based on a handful of data points. Checking something less often isn't laziness, even though it can feel that way when everyone around you seems to be glued to a live dashboard. For a genuinely noisy metric, is the only way to actually see the real pattern instead of just staring at the static sitting on top of it. None of this needs fancy tooling or a paid analytics suite to pull off. What it needs is a short, honest list, which numbers you check weekly purely for operational health, and which ones you deliberately hold off on until they've had enough time to mean something real. Write that list down once, somewhere you actually see it again. Put the monthly review on your calendar with an actual date attached to it, not a vague someday, and let the weekly check stay quick and almost mechanical, a glance, not a study session that eats your morning. No metric checked on any cadence replaces your own judgment about your own business, and nothing I've said here is meant to suggest otherwise. A number can tell you that something changed. It can't always tell you why, and it definitely can't tell you what to do next. That part stays on you, no matter how good the dashboard looks or how confident the chart makes you feel. Fiducial fanasabdeen you for me is the lifetime value mechanics, the lifetime value estimate, and where that estimate actually comes from. Every one of these explainers lives in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. The whole metric library laid out in plain English with the same honesty about what each number can and can't tell you. Every metric I've talked about today is explained in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. So if that's useful to you, go have a look and subscribe for the next